Aloha and welcome to UH Manoa. My name is Jonathan Pettit from the Department of Religions and Ancient Civilizations. This webinar series is hosted by the Center for Chinese Studies at UH Manoa and it aims to foster interdisciplinary understanding of mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and other Chinese-speaking societies worldwide, as well as of Chinese civilization and its long connections to Hawaii. This webinar series is open and free for all and is one of the center's main conduits to engage with scholars in Chinese studies worldwide. So we'll have three presentations this afternoon, each about 20 minutes long, and we'll follow that up with a Q&A session that will last 20 minutes as well. And if you're new to Zoom, or at least to this type of webinar, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, as well as a chat tab at the bottom of your screen. So we ask that you use, if you have like some logistical issue, some problem, please use the chat to ask us any question, and we're happy to help you out. The Q&A button, please use that to ask questions, and feel free to write them as soon as you can as speakers are talking. Yeah, don't wait until the very end. So before I begin, I want to thank and acknowledge the director of the Center for Chinese Studies, Dr. Ming Baoyu, and Associate Director Ni Zhang, and Assistant Adriana Choi for all their help in putting this webinar series together and helping us promote it and helping bring you here. And thank you all for being here. So in today's webinar, we're going to examine religious and societal dynamics of the early 20th century Northeast China, a region shaped by the intersecting influences of Chinese, Korean, and Japanese cultures. This borderland area became a unique crossroads during a time of political upheaval, imperial ambition, and cultural exchange. As the Qing dynasty collapsed, the new powers vied for control. Traditional Chinese beliefs encountered both Korean spiritual practices and Japanese and religious and political ideologies. Japanese expansion brought with it not only military and economic changes, but also attempts to reshape local society through the promotion of state Shinto and controlled forms of Buddhism. So at the same time, Korean immigrants carried Christianity and indigenous beliefs into the region, enriching and complicating the spiritual landscape. So today's discussion will explore these diverse influences and how they collided, coexisted, and transformed everyday life and religious identity. So our first speaker is Jung-Sung Kim Sun. She is a postdoctoral research associate at Purdue University. Her research focuses on Korean churches and missionaries in early 20th century Manchuria, examining how Christianity shaped identity, mobility, and resistance under colonial rule. She has led multidisciplinary grant-funded projects on religiosity, intercultural development, and transnational history. Drawing from history, religious studies, and education, her work highlights the role of faith-based networks in shaping inter-Asian connections and sheds light on the cultural dynamics of empire in East Asia. Please help me welcome Sun.
Hi, thank you for your introduction. And I will share my screen first, and then yes, my name is Jung-Sung Kim, and I'm working at Center on Religion and the Global East at Purdue University. I will be sharing a story unfolds not in the traditional centers of mission history, but on the contested frontier of Manchuria, a space shaped by migration, empire, resistance, and faith. Okay, and I need to go back to this slide. And this map helps us visualize the complexity of the mission field in Manchuria. The shaded regions represent where Western and Korean missionaries were active, sometimes overlapping, sometimes distinct. Many of Western missionaries, and especially those from United States, Canada, and France, came into Manchukuo with previous experience working in Korea. They brought with them not only language skills, but also theological frameworks and administrative structures and a network of connections that extended across Northeast Asia. Meanwhile, Korean missionaries, many of them lay leaders and educators, also crossed into Manchukuo, especially into areas like Yanbian, Longjing, and Shenyang, and where large Korean diaspora communities had settled. Their work was often informal but deeply rooted in the needs of Korean settlers, teaching literacy, leading prayer revivals, and planting house churches. In many areas, Western and Korean missionaries collaborated, holding joint services, establishing schools together, or distributing translated scriptures. But they also worked independently, shaped by different goals, audience, and resources. So this map isn't just about geography, it's about the shared yet distinct paths that Western and Korean Christianity took as they encountered empire, culture, and suffering in Mexico. Why should we focus on Manchuria in a discussion about missions? And it's because Manchuria was more than just a geographical frontier. It was a cross-section of overlapping empires, ideologies, and migrations. In the early 20th century, it became a contested space between China, Japan, Russia, and a massive influx of Korean settlers. These Koreans, fleeing famine, colonization, or searching for opportunity, brought their faith with them or encountered it anew here. Manchuria became the testing ground for multiple mission models, some institutional and foreign, others indigenous and resistant. So the question is not only what missionaries did it here, but who shaped Christianity on the ground? And how those decisions echo today. In the next few slides, we will examine both the structure and the stories behind that. Long before the 1930s, and Christianity had already crossed into Manchuria, not through Western missionaries, but through Korean merchants and translators. In the 1870s and 1880s, Scottish missionary John Ross, working in Shenyang, collaborated with Korean merchant Seo Sang-yoon to produce the first Korean translation of the New Testament. It was printed in Manchuria and smuggled back into Korea via trade routes. This was the beginning of Korean Christianity in diaspora. Meanwhile, throughout the late 19th and the early 20th centuries, Korean migration to Manchuria surged. After Japan's annexation of Korea in 1910 and its establishment of Manchukuo in 1932, Koreans found themselves caught between colonial powers. They built churches not just for worship, but for survival, identity, and even political resistance. The revival that began in Pyongyang in 1907 and marked the spiritual birth of Korean evangelicalism. But its impact didn't stay within Korea's border. In early 1908, revival fervor spread into Manchuria, especially into Liuyang and Shenyang. Korean settlers and lay leaders carried that fire northward. And Canadian missionary Jonathan Gofford joined in. These revival meetings were emotional, grassroots, and marked by public repentance and powerful testimonies. For the first time, many Chinese believers experienced revival worship in partnership with Korean Christians. This wasn't just a spiritual enthusiasm, it shaped the theology, tone, and urgency of missions in Manchuria. The revival was not imported from the West, it was shared across borders through pain, prayer, and community. Western missions in Manchuria were largely structured and institution-based. Missionaries like Dugald Christie of the Scottish Presbyterian Church established hospitals, schools, and seminaries. The Catholic Church, especially under figures like Bishop Gaspar, negotiated carefully with both Chinese and Japanese authorities to secure permissions and protect institutions. These missions aimed to evangelize, but also to civilize, to bring modern medicine, Western education, and legal order. In many ways, they saw themselves as brokers of stability in a volatile region. But their methods often relied on hierarchy, diplomacy, and alignment with imperial structures. What you see in this photograph is not a mission board gathering from the West, but a historic moment in Korean Christian history. The first annual missionary conference in Manchuria, known as Manju Seongyuyeolbae. These Korean missionaries were self-organized. They worked without Western oversight, funding, or denominational infrastructure. Their strategy was not to build seminaries or hospitals, but to evangelize from the ground up among fellow Koreans in labor camps, rural villages, and refugee towns. They preached in Korean, taught literacy to women, and led a nightly prayer meeting that became revival movements. Their theology was shaped by migration, poverty, and the urgent need to survive, not just physically, but spiritually and nationally. This photo captures more than a meeting. It's the birth of grassroots of gospel movement, owned and led by Korean diaspora. This table lays out the core contrast between Western and Korean missionary models, showing that even within the same mission field, the logic of ministry was vastly different. Western missionaries such as Douglas Christie or the Catholic orders often came with formal training, foreign funding, and imperial diplomacy. Their focus was on building institutions, schools, hospitals, and seminaries, and working with official channels. Their mission style was structured, and their audience often included Chinese elites and Japanese bureaucrats. Korean missionaries, on the other hand, were lay preachers, teachers, and evangelists with minimal resources. Many had no formal backing, only a Bible, their language, and a deep conviction. Their audience was primarily other Korean migrants, displaced, laboring, and vulnerable. They taught in vernacular Korean, ran house churches, and often blended evangelism with education and resistance. Even their theology differed. Western missions often emphasized modernity and civilization. Korean missionaries emphasized identity, memory, and community healing. These were not competing models. They were coexisting responses to the same calling under different conditions. Manchuria didn't just allow religion, it shaped it. The government categorized religious groups as official, quasi-official, and or unapproved based on how useful they were to the state. Christianity was technically permitted, but only as a tool for moral governance. Churches were required to participate in flag salute, national anthem singing, and emperor worship. Even Catholic Mass sometimes ended with patriotic songs. Protestant churches were pushed into include loyalty sermons, and clergy were monitored for subversive ideas. This was more than a cultural pressure, it was a spiritual coercion. Churches had to choose resist and risk closure, or cooperate and risk compromise. In this context, the line between faith and politics blurred, and both Western and Korean missionaries had to ask, can the gospel survive when wrapped in an imperial flag? Although these specific photos were not taken into Manchuria in 1934, they visually reflect what Korean and Catholic schools and Protestant schools were facing at this time. Students, often in Christian institutions, were required to participate in imperial flag ceremonies, singing national anthems, and even attend state shrine rituals. These acts blurred the line between civic loyalty and spiritual compromise. Let me now introduce four people who didn't just respond to the context, they shaped it. Han Kyung-hee, a theory educator and evangelist, led the March 12 Manse movement in Manchuria. He founded Christian schools as a site of resistance, where worship and nationalism merged. Choi Hyuk-ju, a humble church builder in Shenyang, believed in the power of lay leadership. He trained villages to build and sustain churches without outside help. He turned fields into pulpits. pulpit, Bishop Gaspé and faced the empire hands-on, and as the Vatican representative to Moscow, he negotiated religious freedom while managing shrine obligations. His legacy is a case study in ecclesial diplomacy. And then there were Korean women missionaries. Even though we do not know and their specific names, they often overlooked, but incredibly influential. They ran literacy schools, hosted prayer revivals, and served as midwives and nurses. For many Korean women, these missionaries were the forced to treat them with dignity and teach them to read scripture. After World War II, and this map is from our center website, Western missionaries left. Catholic networks were dismantled, but the Korean churches in Manchuria, especially in Yangon, remained. By 1936, there were already 55 Korean Protestant churches and over 7,000 believers in the religion. In the region. After 1945, without foreign funds or pastoral oversight, these churches adopted. By the 2020s, the number of Korean Chinese Christians in Yangon surpassed 100,000. This is a powerful testimony. While institutions collapsed, faith endured, rooted in community memory, oral scripture, and theology of survival. These churches became not only religious communities, but guardians of Korean identity, language, solidarity inside China. So far, we've talked about strategy, survival, and politics, but what's the big picture? Korean missionaries in Manchuria were not side characters in Western missions. They were protagonists. They crossed borders, planted churches, educated girls, and resisted imperial assimilation, all in their own language and on their own terms. They developed what we might call a diaspora mythology, a way of doing missions that's rooted in exile, shaped by suffering and driven by communal memory. Let me end with this thought. The mission field in Moscow was shared, but it wasn't shared equally. Western missionaries brought structure and status. Korean missionaries brought language, identity, and pain. Some saw the gospel as a civilization, others saw it as a liberation. Some relied on diplomacy, others relied on prayer and resilience. And yet, across all these differences, churches were planted, lives were changed, and a legacy was born. Today, and as we looked at global Christianity, we must ask, whose story have we remembered, and whose faith survived when everything else collapsed? This is all my presentation, and I'm happy to answer to your question in Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sun. Excellent. Our second presenter is Carly Shimizu. She's an affiliated researcher at the Research Faculty of Media and Communication of Hokkaido University, Japan. Her recent publications include The Legacy of Shinto Shrines at the Borders of Imperial Japan and Heritage Contested Sites and Borders of Memory in the Asia Pacific. And the monograph Overseas Shinto Shrines, Religion, Secularity, and the Japanese Empire. Her research interests lie in the legacy of Shinto shrines located outside of Japan and the construction of colonial and post-colonial secularisms. Turn the floor to you, Carly, please.
Again, I'll just share my slides in a minute. Let's see. Oh, let me share my screen there. Share screen. Okay, I think that's working. So good morning, everyone, or I think it's afternoon there now. So as I was kindly introduced, I'm Carly Shimizu, and I'm affiliated researcher at Hokkaido University. So today I will talk about how ideas about ethnicity and nationalism interacted with Shinto shrines and sites in Manchukuo, during the 1930s and 40s. So kind of interestingly, although today we consider shrines to be religion, like officially, like legally they're a religion nowadays, during this time period, there was a separation between like state Shinto type shrines and other like new like sect Shinto type shrines. And the state Shinto type shrines technically weren't legally a religion generally. But anyway, so first I want to give like a few key historical dates to help orient my discussion. I put a timeline here on my slide. So Manchukuo was founded as a puppet state by the Japanese Kwantung Army, the Kanto Army, in 1932. However, the Manchurian Emperor, Puyi, did not have his enthronement right until 1934. So his right, this enthronement right, drew on Chinese pageantry, while the new state's foundational ideas were described in Confucian terms like the kingly way or ethnic harmony. So Odo Rakudo and Gozoku Hyowa in Japanese, but I put the kanji on my slide, so you can see that if you don't speak Japanese. Or the Chinese characters, I should say, on the slide. However, the next year, in 1935, the Manchurian emperor makes his first official visit to Japan. As a result, he declares that Japan and Manchukuo have perfect unity in spirit, or Itoku Ishin, and issues the address to the people upon his imperial return edict. The same year, the Kwantung Army began making plans for a Manchurian version of Japan's Yasukuni Jinja called Kenkokubyo. As you might know, Yasukuni Jinja, it's very famous, but it was Imperial Japan's main site for venerating the war dead. Quite controversial nowadays. In 1936, Japanese migration to Manchukuo rapidly increased, and thus Shinto shrines did too. Finally, in 1940, the Manchurian emperor makes his second visit to Japan and then issues the Tohokuhon Tenjo Shoujo. Sorry, in English, I translate it as establishing the pillar of the state edict. And the explanation of this edict suggested that the Confucian foundational ideals of the kingly way and ethnic harmony were included in, but also superseded by the Shinto ideas of Kannagara no Michi, or Kodo, like the imperial way, and Hakko Ichiyo, or like four corners under one roof, or like 8 cords under one roof. And this phrase, this sort of wartime phrase, was often glossed as universal brotherhood, although I don't think many people now would approve of that translation. Anyway, so furthermore, the Kwantung Army's like shrine project reached fruition in 1940 with the establishment of actually 2 sites, Kenkoku Shinbyo and Kenkoku Chureibyo, which are often described as Manchukuo's version of the Ise Jingu and Yasukuni Jinja. Also, Amaterasu Omikami, who is the ancestral kami of the Japanese imperial family, is enshrined at Kenkoku Shinbyo and thus declared the foundational kami, or Genshin in Japanese, of Manchukuo. So first that's the basic history of shrines in Manchukuo. But if we were to categorize Manchurian shrines, they could be divided into 3 different categories: ethnic shrines, multi-ethnic shrines, and shrines to the war dead, or sometimes they're called ossuary shrines, no Kotsujinja. So although individual shrines may overlap these categories to a certain extent, I think these categories are helpful for understanding how shrines functioned within broader society. The first type of shrine I will talk about is ethnic shrines, or shrines that mainly focused on the ethnic Japanese community living in Manchukuo. These Shinto shrines aim to follow the same pattern as shrines within the Japanese home islands as much as possible. They most often enshrined Amaterasu Omikami, who is most significantly venerated at the Ise Jingu in Japan. Japanese migrants moving to Manchukuo as members of an immigration company often visited the Ise Jingu to receive a talisman. Oh, sorry. Oh dear. A talisman, so in time, which is called a taima, which then became the object of veneration, or mitamashiro, at the new shrine they set up at the center of their Manchurian settlement. Officially, Ise Jingu did not provide divided spirits for new shrines. However, migrants themselves often called these talismans divided spirits. So there remained a gap between the official theology and the understanding of the migrants themselves when it came to shrines. At these shrines, Amaterasu served as an ethnic kami of the Japanese and helped preserve the migrants' sense of connection to the Japanese home islands. For example, Hataho Jinja, which I have on the slide there, venerated only Amaterasu. The Hataho community was made up of migrants from several different prefectures, so Amaterasu helped them form into a single imagined community of being just Japanese. The Hataho shrine would use the Ise Jingu influenced Shinmei style of architecture, and it was nicknamed Iyasaka Jinja, after the morning cheer migrants learned to practice daily during their nationalistic immigration training in Japan. Likewise, migrants sometimes established their community shrine essentially as a copy of their hometown shrine. In this case, a divided spirit from their hometown shrine was brought with the migrants. For example, migrants in the settlement of Saitama village established Hikawa Jinja, which shared the same kami and the same name as the main shrine of Saitama Prefecture in Japan. Rural immigration settlements had less opportunity to interact with non-Japanese, but within the cities, there were many opportunities for Japanese migrants to mix with other ethnicities. Despite this, most shrines catered only to the Japanese population. In many cases, non-Japanese were discouraged or even prohibited from visiting the shrine. This is quite a difference from Korea. Examples of shrines which prohibited non-Japanese included Seinan Jinja, which is pictured here, Seinan Jinja, and then also Bujun Jinja and Kaigen Jinja, and also Hoshurei Jinja and Tetsure Jinja, finally pictured here. So despite the rhetoric of ethnic harmony, most Shinto shrines in Manchukuo were exclusionary towards non-ethnic Japanese. Shinkyo Jinja, here on this slide, is another good example of an ethnic type shrine in Manchukuo. Shinkyo Jinja was the main protector shrine of the capital city of Shinkyo in Japanese pronunciation. Today, that's Chongjun. As such, it had significant influence on shrines across Manchukuo. As you can see, it looks nearly identical to shrines built within the Japanese home islands. But in fact, it was made of ferroconcrete, a very new material. You can also see a water purification basin on the right of the photo. This is typical of a shrine in Japan, but in Manchuria, where temperatures sank into the -30s, it was unusable for half the year. The Japanese Semi-Governmental Research Council on the Overseas Shrine issue suggested that incense might be used instead of water to solve this issue of freezing temperatures, but Japanese migrants almost entirely rejected these localization suggestions. Shinkyo Jinja didn't prohibit, but it did discourage non-ethnic Japanese residents from visiting it. At the same time, all residents, regardless of ethnicity, were expected to demonstrate respect for the shrine. In Shinkyo Jinja's case, the tram line that ran in front of the shrine asked riders to remove their hats as they passed it. In short, these ethnic-type Shinto shrines became exclusive ethnic enclaves that worked to sustain the colonial privileges of the ethnic Japanese in Manchukuo. So the majority of shrines in Manchukuo were of the ethnic type, but there were a few examples of those which made deliberate efforts to incorporate distinctly Manchurian or other multicultural aspects. My first example is Gojo Jinja. This shrine venerated Amaterasu Omikami and the Emperor Meiji, but it also enshrined a kami called Kunitama no Okami. This appellation has precedent in the ancient Japanese classics, but in the 1930s, especially in Korea, which again had a lot of influence on Manchukuo, this term had come to be used as a generic title for a local or an indigenous kami. The name of the shrine, Gojo, also refers to the 5 constant virtues of Confucianism. Weddings conducted at the shrine featured Concordia dress, or kyowafuku, which was a suit designed as the national dress of Manchukuo. Unfortunately, I don't know of any pictures of the shrine itself, but this image here shows the Manchukuo Prime Minister, Zhang Jinghui, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, wearing Concordia dress at the Greater East Asian Conference in 1943. So he's second from the left. So it seems clear that Gojo Jinja attempted to incorporate ideas related to the Manchukuo foundational idea of concordia, or ethnic harmony. There was also a Shinto shrine called Shinton Jinja that was established established by the Manchurian Minister of Justice, Zheng Huanzi, or Cho Kansho in the Japanese pronunciation, in 1938. He established it as a way of honoring his hometown of Shinton. But of particular interest was that he enshrined two imperial founders. Emperor Jimmu is the legendary first emperor of Japan, while Nurhashi is the founder of the Qing dynasty. Thus, here is a Shinto shrine being used to draw a parallel between two great Asian empires, the Great Japanese Empire and the Great Manchurian Empire. Shinton Jinja was established by a Manchurian official, but there was another shrine that actually enshrined a Manchurian official. This shrine, called Taigu, venerated Tei Kosho, or Zheng Zhaozu, who was the first prime minister of Manchukuo. Zheng, by the way, was pressured out of his position by the Kuomintang army in 1935 for ideological differences. Although a Shinto shrine, Taigu is said to have featured Chinese architectural elements, although, again, regrettably, I don't know of any photographs of it. Furthermore, the shrine's foundation rite is recorded to have had Chinese as well as Arabic language addresses, in addition to Japanese. The participants in the foundational rite wore an amalgamation of Japanese, Chinese, and Western style clothing that was described as Hakko Ichiyu dress. The Japanese founder of the shrine, Ota Toyo, was clearly influenced by some of the same pan-Asian ideals that motivated Zheng during his time as prime minister. These three shrines demonstrate a multi-ethnic conception of Shinto that was circulating in Manchukuo and other overseas areas of the Japanese Empire. While Japanese Shinto ritual formed the basis of these shrines, multi-ethnic elements were subsumed into the shrine. This, to a degree, Japanized these elements, giving them legitimacy within the Japanese order while still maintaining the superiority of pure Japanese customs. These examples are from Manchuria, but I should mention that there are similar examples in other areas, such as colonial Taiwan and also Brazil, where there are many Japanese migrants. So that said, this style of multi-ethnic shrine was more of the exception rather than the rule. Taigu was unusual in that it venerated a Manchurian, but it was also unusual in that it venerated a recently deceased person. Shinto shrines have traditionally been reluctant to venerate the recent dead, but that change occurred in the mid-1800s when new rites for venerating the war dead developed in Japan. Although originating from Confucian-based ancestral ritual, these new spirit-inviting rites use Shinto ritual to call back the glorious spirits of the imperial war dead temporarily. A permanent site for this rite was established in Tokyo in 1869, and 10 years later, the site became an official Shinto shrine called Yasukuni Jinja. Similar spirit-inviting sites were established across Japan, and in the 1930s, they too were converted into formal Shinto shrines called Gokoku Jinja. They still exist today. So while Shinto shrines had traditionally kept the recent dead at arm's length, the development of spirit-inviting shrines, as well as another type of shrine called Bekkaku Kanpeisha, but that's another topic, created a close connection between the war dead and Shinto shrines. These shrines became increasingly important as the number of war dead rose in the late 1930s, and in Manchuria, shrines were sometimes used to commemorate particularly bloody battles. For example, in 1912, Ryoryo Jinja enshrined the kami of Yasukuni, so that is the war dead who died in the local area, in addition to its main kami. The same year, a small ossuary shrine, so no kotu hokora, so literally ossuary, was established near Onto Jinja. A larger ossuary shrine here, on slide 13, here, in the bottom picture here. So that was established at Mount Bayou near Port Arthur. To use a Shinto shrine as an ossuary might be unique to Manchuria, although there are a few examples of graveyards at Shinto shrines, such as Hakodate Gokoku Jinja here in Hokkaido, where I live. In relation to this, there are also many examples of war memorials, so like Chureito or so on, in Manchukuo. These monuments use a variety of architectural types. Obelisks and modernist monuments were very popular, but Victorian and classical Western architecture was also used. But despite this variety of architectural styles, Shinto ritual was often used during ceremonies at these memorials. Thus, a significant current connected the war dead and Shinto shrines during the 1930s and 40s. So you can see this, the tower at the top of this postcard is a war memorial, and the ossuary shrine is at the bottom. So finally, I want to briefly discuss Kenkoku Shinbyo and Kenkoku Chureibyo, although the next presenter will talk more about them, I think. So these sites were not shrines or jinja in Japanese, but rather used the Chinese term mausoleum or byo. And you can see the kanji again, or the Chinese character on my slide. I should say that in Taiwan, mausoleums, or shibyo, had already been theorized as the sort of Chinese or Taiwanese equivalent to Japanese Shinto shrines. And Taiwan's first Shinto shrine was, in fact, a converted Taiwanese shrine mausoleum. So there had already been some equivalency between Chinese mausoleums and Japanese shrines at this point. Anyway, I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that in 1935, the Kwantung Army began plans to build a Manchurian version of Japan's Yasukuni Jinja. The initial plan was based on Chinese mausoleums, keeping in line with Manchukuo's original founding ideals that were inspired by Confucian and Chinese-style grandeur. The army imagined the site as a sort of spiritual defense against Manchukuo's northern border. Over the late 1930s, however, the site was increasingly Shintoized. The orientation of the site was shifted from facing the northern border to facing the Ise Jingu in Japan. Furthermore, Shinto architectural elements, such as the water purification basin, were added. The army wished to enshrine the war dead along with Amaterasu Omikami at the site, but this was unacceptable to Shintoists in Japan. Thus, the site was divided into two. The original site became Kenkoku Chureibyo, pictured here, dedicated to the war dead, and another site located within the Manchurian Imperial Palace became Kenkoku Shinbyo, which enshrined Amaterasu Omikami. Although discussions were briefly raised about also enshrining the Qing dynasty founder, similar to Shinton Jinja that I previously discussed, the idea never gained traction. Kenkoku Chureibyo, perhaps thanks to its original conception as a Chinese mausoleum, is visually remarkable and does not resemble a stereotypical Shinto shrine, as you can see in this photograph, a little fuzzy, but you can tell, and also this postcard here. Kenkoku Shinbyo, on the other hand, hid away in the imperial palace, more similarly resembled a Shinto shrine, which you can see here. This is a stamp of it. But it retains markers of its non-ethnic Japanese nature in small matters, such as the shrine crest, which features sorghum and the noble orchid. You can see it more clearly in this photograph. It's on the curtain there. Regardless, both these sites utilize Shinto ritual. Furthermore, Kenkoku Shinbyo enshrined Amaterasu as Manchukuo's foundational kami and was commemorated with the Tokuhon Tenjo Shoujo edict that I mentioned previously. The previous Confucian ideals of Manchukuo were overridden by the Japan-centered ideals of the way of the kami or the imperial way, and also Hakko Ichiu. Thus, like the multi-ethnic shrines discussed previously, Kenkoku Shinbyo and Kenkoku Chureibyo worked to subsume and legitimate non-ethnic Japanese customs into the framework of a state, or I would argue secular Shinto. Not only that, but as these were sites of national ritual, they worked to subsume and theoretically legitimize the entire puppet state of Manchukuo into a Shinto-based Japanese world order, carefully preaching brotherhood while keeping it subordinate to Japan. So I think my time is probably running out, but let me shortly summarize what I discussed today. So in the first half of the 20th century, there was a variety of conceptions about shrines that influenced their establishment in Manchukuo. For many Japanese migrants, shrines served as a connection to their home, like their hometown, and an exclusive site for ethnic Japanese. Especially in the towns, shrines became a means for ethnic Japanese to preserve and exercise their colonial privilege. In contrast, the Japanese and Manchurian government saw shrines as potentially multi-ethnic sites to be visited and venerated by all Manchurian citizens, regardless of ethnicity. This led to the incorporation of select non-Japanese customs at some shrines and the foundation of Kenkoku Shinbyo. However, this multiculturalism at shrines, even while incorporating some non-Japanese customs and people into the Shinto framework, also worked to subordinate those customs and people. Whether Shinto shrines in Manchuria remained ethnic enclaves or incorporated a variety of ethnicities, they both worked to preserve colonial privilege. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I should have mentioned at the beginning that this is a kind of homecoming for Carly as well. She received her bachelor's degree from UH Manoa. So welcome virtually, welcome home.
It's really my pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, our third presenter is Zhang Ziyi. Zhang, born in Beijing, China, is currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Tokyo, specializing in the history of the relationship between religions and state on modern Japan. Zhang's research focuses particularly on how state and individual relationships are expressed through Shinto rituals. He is specifically interested in the process of formulating the shrine system and the institutional connections between overseas and Japanese shrines. Ziyi, please.
Okay,